Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Hello, welcome. I am Suzanne Spalding. I am the Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and I lead the Defending Democratic Institutions project here at CSIS. I was formerly the Undersecretary for what was then called the National Protection and Programs Directorate at DHS, and has now become the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And we're very excited to be able to have this conversation this afternoon about DHS's Cybersecurity Mission with a wonderful group of folks who are really my friends and colleagues. So it's a bit like old home week here for me, and I'm hoping that as a result, this will be a very lively conversation. All these folks know each other and have worked together and really are continuing to work together. So I'm going to introduce our panelists and get us started. Michael Daniel, who is currently the president and CEO of the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization. It was started by some of the major cybersecurity companies back when Michael and I were still in government. And their goal is to come together to share real-time, high-quality cyber threat information among companies and organizations in the cybersecurity field to improve the cyber ecosystem. Before joining CTA, Michael served from June of 2012 to January of 2017 as the Special Assistant to President Obama and the Cybersecurity Coordinator on the National Security Council staff, and that's where Michael and I worked closely together. And he led the interagency development of cybersecurity strategy and policy at the national level and oversaw agency implementation of those policies. Prior to that, Michael spent 17 years at the Office of Management and Budget. Bless you. Chris Krebs, who is currently a partner at Krebs Stamos Group. He was the first director of DHS's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, having succeeded where I failed in getting that Congress to move on that legislation to transition NPPD into CISA. Prior to that, he was serving as senior counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security, advising that secretary on a range of cybersecurity, critical infrastructure, and resilience issues. But I really came to first know Chris when he was working at Microsoft, where he was a member of their government affairs team and the director of cybersecurity policy, and someone that was very supportive of the work we were doing at DHS and the transition efforts that we had underway, and someone I turned to frequently for guidance and advice. Really appreciated his support. Tim Maurer is the current senior counselor for cybersecurity to the current secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas at DHS. Prior to joining DHS, Tim was the director of the Cyber Policy Initiative at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and that's where Tim and I worked together on issues around cybersecurity norms. And particularly, Tim led an effort, research, analysis, and then implementation, looking at the geopolitical implications of the internet and cybersecurity with a focus on the global financial system, as well as influence operations and other issues. Tim is an author. He published a book in 2018, Cyber Mercenaries, the State, Hackers, and Power, largely about the use of proxies by nation states in cyber. And before joining Carnegie, he was director of the Global Cybersecurity Norms and Resilience Project at New America and head of research for their cybersecurity initiative. Kemba Walden is another alum of DHS. She's currently serving as Assistant General Counsel in Microsoft's Digital Crimes Unit and is responsible for launching and leading that unit's ransomware program. She started her career at Microsoft as Senior Counsel for Cyber and Democracy, providing counsel to the Defending Democracy program through the 2020 presidential election. But she had spent a decade at DHS serving in several attorney roles, and including the lead attorney for DHS as a representative to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, or CFIUS. And she was a cybersecurity attorney, which is where I got to know her at DHS for CISA, and prior to that, of course, for NPPD. She was also, for some time, the primary cybersecurity legal advisor to the Elections Task Force, which is now called the Elections Security Initiative. So a wonderful team that we have here today to have this conversation to help us better understand the mission of DHS, the role of DHS in cybersecurity, and some of the plans that are underway and that we expect to see going forward. I want to remind everyone that's watching that you can ask questions. There is on the CSIS event page a big green button, Ask Questions Here. So hit that button and type in your questions, and my colleague Davey Nair will be putting those together and providing them to me so that I can ask our panelists at the end of our moderated conversation. But we're going to start with Tim. Tim Maurer, this is, I think, your first public appearance as the senior counselor to Secretary Mayorkas. And I don't think that's a role that a lot of people are familiar with. So I thought we could start with you talking a bit about this role. I know, it's new to you as well. You haven't been in it very long, but tell us about how you see the role and how you interact and relate to the other parts of DHS that are working on cyber, particularly, of course, CISA.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And first of all, thanks to CSIS for hosting this event, and to you for your thought leadership when you were in government, but now also at CSIS and as a commissioner of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. It's great to reconnect and now in my new role, and delighted to be part of this fantastic panel. And a big thanks to all of you who have paved the way for where we are today with respect to DHS and CISA. Before I describe my role, let me first maybe highlight the fantastic team that the Secretary has been building here at DHS over the past 2 months, where the team that has come together include folks like Jen Daskell, who's a leading legal expert and scholar with deep policy expertise, Jake Brown, who is a senior advisor in our management unit. We have Eric Heisen, who's the department's CIO. And then we have, obviously, Eric Goldstein, Nitin Natarajan, and David Mussington at CISA. And this team complements the deep bench of cyber expertise that the department already has. And we are enormously grateful for Acting Director Brandon Wales, as well as the staff at CISA and the various components, and folks like Assistant Secretary Tom McDermott, who have been helping us get on board, settle in, get up to speed. And we're deeply grateful for all the work that the staff has been doing in not just the past few weeks, but the past few months. So with respect to my role, this is actually a role that Chris, as you mentioned, had before he became CISA director, and a few others before. But it wasn't until Chris became the senior counselor to the secretary that this role directly advised the secretary. And it was a reflection of the growing recognition that cybersecurity remains a top priority for government, that we continue to face a lot of challenges. And Secretary Mayorkas has also made cybersecurity one of his top priorities. So in order to reflect this as a priority for him as a secretary, he decided that one of his senior counselors, and there are a handful of us here in the secretary's office, would be dedicated to this issue. So unlike counselors at some of the other departments across the US government, DHS is a little different in that, given the deep bench we have on cyber expertise, my role is to essentially keep an eye on what needs to rise to the level of the secretary when it comes to cybersecurity, so that I can either brief him or prepare him, or if things happen suddenly, we have information ready to go so that he can make decisions. It also means that I engage with essentially 3 sets of stakeholders in my day-to-day job, starting with the department itself and coordinating across the department, the secretary's priorities, and making sure that I'm aware of what is happening across the various components and what needs secretary level attention. And as I mentioned, we have the benefit and luxury at the department to have this fantastic team and deep bench of cyber expertise, which makes my job, thankfully, a lot easier. And then the second part is engaging with our partners across the interagency and my counterparts at the other agencies so that we can help advance the agenda and priority of the administration. And as you've seen, President Biden already during the transition as president-elect had issued a statement and made clear that cybersecurity is one of his priorities and that he's committed to elevating it across all levels of government. And then the third part is, and delighted to have Kemba on this call as well, and Michael in his new role, is engaging with our partners outside of government, so industry, think tanks, academics, given that we can't implement this vision alone and that we need to be in lockstep with partners outside of government as well. So concretely, my role when I started this is the end of month 2 for me was the Secretary's desire to give a speech early on that outlined his vision for the department and the role of CISA as well and the other components. So I've spent the past few weeks working closely with the department and our partners to put together this vision that the Secretary announced last week. Excellent. And
we want to get into that, some of the content of the Secretary's speech, and particularly the 60-day sprints. But I might ask you first to expand just briefly on you talked about your work with the other components within DHS. And again, I think CISA, Chris put CISA on the map, I think more for public awareness, but there are other parts of the department that also have important cybersecurity related missions, and maybe give you just a couple minutes to talk a bit more about those.
Yeah, happy to. And first of all, a huge thanks to Chris and his team for really putting CISA on the map. And I think, especially looking back at the past year, I think it was a challenging year for everybody to truly focus their attention on protecting the election. And I cannot thank Chris enough, but also you, Suzanne, for MPPD and all the work that has gone into the department, and for Michael's support from the White House at the time as well. So with respect to the work and the vision for the department that the Secretary outlined last week. For those of you who are not yet familiar with CISA or only know about the connection to the pineapple, let me briefly recap that CISA's role is focused on essentially protecting the civilian federal agencies and networks, and that CISA has a key role to play here, in addition to being the essentially operational cyber agency within government and the key interlocutor with the private sector and the state and local governments, so that we are not just focused on protecting the federal government, which obviously in the wake of recent campaigns is a top priority and focus right now, but that we're also focused on what can we do to protect and help our respective partners across the country from coast to coast to make that happen. What a lot of people are not aware of is that in addition to CISA, the department actually has a number of other components with important cyber missions. So for example, the US Secret Service has a two-pronged mission. The first one that everybody's familiar with respect to protecting the president and senior cabinet officials. The Secret Service also has an important cyber mission, and it's focused on investigating cyber-enabled crime, and has been doing so for decades. So the Secret Service, in addition to the FBI and in addition to the Homeland Security investigations component within DHS, is very much focused on investigating cyber-enabled crimes, which means that the department is not just focused on the resilience aspect and what can we do to increase basic cyber hygiene and protecting, which is CISA's focus, but we're also focused on the response side of the investigatory piece. And then last but certainly not least, the Coast Guard, also part of the Department of Homeland Security, actually also has an important cyber mission because it is the sector-specific agency with respect to the maritime transportation system. And if you consider the amount of the percentage of imports and exports just going through ports, that gives you a sense for the enormous task with respect to protecting the maritime transportation system. The Coast Guard is also working with US Cyber Command on some of the implementation of that piece of work, and obviously protecting the Coast Guard networks as well. And the previous administration had a dedicated plan to increase the cybersecurity of the maritime transportation system, which we are continuing to implement. And then TSA is not only obviously focused on airports, but also has some important responsibility with respect to surface transportation and cybersecurity, for example, pipeline cybersecurity. So CISA is the top priority for the Secretary in terms of focus, but there's a lot of other work that's happening across the components that we try to empower and facilitate from the front office.
Great. Excellent. And I think it's important too. I'm not sure that most folks understand that CISA is not just a cybersecurity agency, right? That's what it's become known for, and certainly that's where most of the press attention has been. But Congress very intentionally left the all hazards mission for CISA. So it is both, as NPPD was, it is responsible for both physical and virtual threats to our nation's critical infrastructure, which is increasingly important given the convergence between physical and cyber, both as you try to assess and prioritize risks, and as you try to reduce those risks. We need to look at both the physical and the cyber. And I know, Tim, that you get that, and Chris Krebs obviously understood that from day one as well. But Tim, I want to jump into the Secretary's speech. He talked about a number of 60-day sprints, and maybe you can expand on that a little bit. And then I think we want to do a deep dive on the ransomware.
Yeah, happy to. So this idea of the series of sprints came up because we had to think through, with respect to the work that's happening across the components, one of the challenges for a large organization like the department, but any large company like that, is how do you channel the attention of the most senior leadership and can empower the work that is happening across the organization, and how do you provide some strategic direction and a sense of urgency to drive the key priorities forward. So this series of sprints is essentially designed to help facilitate the work that is happening across the department, but to use the Office of the Secretary and the Secretary strategically to help drive forward a specific set of priorities. So the series of sprints we announced for the coming year, each sprint will last 60 days, will focus on, first, tackling ransomware more effectively, second, the cybersecurity workforce, which includes the workforce at the department, but also the role that we can play with respect to the federal government's workforce, and then the nation's cybersecurity workforce, where we face 500,000 vacancies. The third sprint will focus on industrial control systems, given the increasing digitalization of industrial control systems and the vulnerabilities associated with that. The fourth will focus on transportation and cybersecurity, speaking of the Coast Guards and TSA, and making sure that we also continue to implement that work. And then the fifth will focus on election security, making sure that that continues to be a top priority. And the last one will focus on the international dimension of the department's work as it relates to cybersecurity. And the 60-day sprints is essentially designed to think through, how can we elevate existing initiatives that have been taken forward by the components? How can we remove roadblocks for work that has been stuck at some point in the past? And how can we make that happen? And then third, are there gaps that can be filled with new initiatives or where threats have evolved? Speaking of ransomware, where during that 60-day period, we can move along and use the Secretary's office to make those happen. So the work doesn't end within those 60 days. I wish we could solve ransomware within the next 60 days. That will not be happening. But it's more designed to draw attention to a particular priority area and empower the components and the work, also that of our partners, to drive that work forward and elevate it to the new level. And then there are 4 areas where the Secretary will have sustained leadership attention, ranging from protecting democratic institutions to ensuring the protection of the federal government and networks, given the recent campaign, ensuring the integrity of the supply chain and increasing trust. And then last, that's more of a on the horizon issue, preparing for a transition to post-quantum encryption algorithms to complement those series of sprints.
So just a few issues, not too much on your plate. Michael, you're familiar with 60-day sprints. I certainly remember a few 60-day sprints during our time. But this is a lot of issues. First of all, do you think it's the right issue, right set of issues? Is there anything that you would add to that list, although it's pretty long already? And maybe you can talk from the White House perspective on the value of this process, sort of notion of a 60-day sprint.
Sure, sure, Suzanne. I mean, I think one of the things that's very true also in a large organization is that processes will expand to fill whatever time you give them. So, if you say that you're going to spend 6 months on it, you will spend, it's not like anybody's going to get it done early, right? So the it will always expand to fill whatever time you give it. So in many ways, by sort of setting those kinds of rapid deadlines, what you're enabling is the process to actually move and not get mired down in bureaucratic, just the natural sort of bureaucratic tendencies. And so I think from that sense, they're very useful tools. And I think Tim framed it absolutely the right way. You're not going to solve the problem in that length of time. So so don't frame it up as like, we're going to solve this problem in that window. This is where we're going to put sustained focus for a while in order to actually move the process forward so that you knock down some roadblocks. So I think that's very good. I think in terms of the sets of issues, I mean, I completely agree that those are some of the key issues to deal with. I mean, if you take ransomware, for example, I mean, that has transitioned from what was an economic nuisance 8 years ago to a national security and public health and safety threat today. 8 years ago, the ransomware bad guys were mostly locking up individual laptops, and the ransom was $100 or something like that. Right now, they're encrypting whole school systems or whole hospital systems, whole companies, and potentially putting forth ransoms in the millions. The average ransom payment now is well over $300,000. This is that has really emerged as a national security problem, and we have to change the way that we're approaching it as a government and as a private sector, because what we've been doing is clearly not enough. I mean, those other issues that Tim referred to, I mean, the workforce and industrial control systems and transportation security, all of those things, are critical in there. I think that the challenge for the department will be managing those sprints and managing those ongoing efforts that Tim referenced in and amongst all the other crises that will inevitably come up, because as my friends in the military like to say, the bad guys get a vote in what happens. And so I think it is also important that the department have the ability to have some resources that can be deployed to whatever those emerging crises are. We don't know what they are. We just know that they will happen. I mean, Suzanne, you and I saw that. I mean, some of them you could almost set your clock by, which is, Tim, I would tell you, just be ready for whatever's going to happen around the 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, because the bad guys know when our holidays are. It's not an accident. So, we are going to have to deal with those exigent circumstances. But I really think that's a good set of priorities for the department to have.
Great. Kemba, I know that you and Michael have been part of a group that's been looking particularly at ransomware as an issue. And outside of your work at Microsoft, Microsoft has also been very engaged as a company on this issue. And the group that you're now going to be providing legal guidance to is going to be focused on ransomware. Talk to us a little bit about the work that Microsoft has done and some of the thinking that you're doing with regard to how we approach and change our approach to dealing with this growing threat.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot that I've learned over the last several months since the presidential election. The first is that, as Michael alluded to, ransomware is a high profit enterprise at this point, with little to no costs to entry, right? There are very few barriers to entry. And it's evolved. It's evolved into ransomware as a service. It's based and driven on human intelligence and research. It's now modular, such that someone like me who's never coded anything can get into this criminal business, right? So what do I mean by that? It's modular. You can purchase the malware. You can purchase access to networks, and you can target specific industries and really lock up an entire hospital or school system. So it's human intelligence driven. So the bad guys know exactly how much you can afford or potentially afford to pay to unlock your system. They understand the sensitive nature of certain data and will exfiltrate that specific data and either prepare to sell it on the black market or spill it into public and ransom victims in that way. And payment is often required in cryptocurrency and more specifically in Bitcoin, just because of the pseudonymous nature of the cryptocurrency economy and the decentralized nature of it. So this is a complex crime. And we need to treat it like that. We need to treat it like a criminal enterprise. Microsoft's response, and I can talk about that in a little bit more detail than I can the ransomware task force, but our response, our plan is to reduce profits, sort of hit them where it hurts. And we'll do that by disrupting the payment distribution system, sort of the cryptocurrency, the flows of money in crypto. But we can also do it by disrupting their negotiation process. So we've learned quite a bit about specific ransomware families and how they negotiate. And we've found the opportunities to disrupt that. But at the same time, our approach is to increase the costs of entry by improving Microsoft's product security and even engaging and collaborating with other cloud platforms that might be used as a resource to develop ransomware, the malware associated with the ransomware. And then in a broader sense, Microsoft is working across industry. We're working with government entities. We're working very closely with DHS, and particularly Secret Service and Homeland Security investigations, along with our mainstays in the FBI. And we're using the court system in innovative ways to seize assets where we can and to make it more challenging for the ransomware criminal enterprise. And like everyone here has acknowledged, we're not solving the problem right away, but our plan is to make a dent, a sizable dent, again, by reducing the profitability of it and by increasing the costs of entry.
That's a lot also, Kemba, and really interesting array of activities for a private sector company, right? Right. So when you talk about disrupting the flow of cryptocurrency to the bad guys, for example, I assume you're doing that in coordination with some piece of government, FBI or?
Absolutely. We're doing it in coordination with the FBI, with the Secret Service, with Homeland Security investigations, with the US Postal Inspector. I mean, the expertise that goes into that is vast, right? The crypto economy is a specialized area. And the government really does have quite a few deep expertise in that space. It's not always widely publicized, but it is there, it exists. And there are a lot of resources that we can use. There are a lot of forensic tools that we use to be able to analyze the flow of transactions and the on-ramps and off-ramps. There's a sizable cyber insurance market that focuses in this space. We work with cryptocurrency exchanges. We work with obviously the large financial institutions in this process, and then the courts, of course. But that's where we intend to have our largest impact. Of course, Microsoft still works in the threat intelligence space and works with law enforcement to assign attribution to criminals in this space, and that's also a vast, that's vast work. That's complicated work. It is not easy to assign attribution to some of these criminal actors, like I said, because it's so modular and human intelligence driven. And we're also disrupting the infrastructure, and we're working with antivirus companies to harden products and services and develop alerts. We work with victims, particularly those that might be customers of Microsoft, to help reduce the harm done by ransom, right? To remediate the problem, to try to extract and exfiltrate the ransomware threat actor and their networks, but then also harden it and close the gates so that they can't be re-victimized. It's a vast problem, and the part that I'm focused on along with my colleagues. But the part that I'm focused on is hurting them where it hits, where the profits are, and making it harder for people without necessarily development skills to enter the market.
Great. Chris, you certainly saw this. We're on the front lines when you were at CISA fighting this threat. And so interested to hear from your perspective at CISA, and also I'm sure this has come up in your private sector in the work that you're doing with Alex Stamos and with respect to ransomware, but then maybe use that as an example to talk about some of the challenges that CISA faces when trying to approach a mission as vast as this one that includes so many parts of our government, and really calls on CISA in many ways in its role, in its interagency, kind of leader of some aspects of the interagency process when responding to something as massive as ransomware.
Yeah, 2018 for me, I think, was the year that ransomware really kind of hit the main stage. When you think about Atlanta, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina, Baltimore twice, Colorado Department of Transportation, you had 23 counties in Texas, you had 9 parishes in Louisiana, you had countless schools, you had hospitals. Even today, the top 3 targets are hospitals, schools, and state and local governments. And it was what I was most frustrated about 3 years ago now at this point, was that it did not rank in terms of cybersecurity threats, ransomware that is. We were still really focused on state actors and the exquisite threats posed by the Chinese MSS, the Russian GRU, and SVR. But what I was seeing on a daily basis was American communities were being functionally disrupted by ransomware on a daily basis. And that's what the American people see. And I was concerned that there was a kind of a death by 1,000 cuts coming our way, where our citizens were going to lose confidence in the ability of the government to deliver the key core services that they needed. And so we really started turning the gas, turning it up on ransomware, with probably the most notable development in 2019, the late summer, where we really made a hard pivot on election security towards ransomware as a threat towards state and local election systems like voter registration database and election night reporting. And I think that's when the light turned on for a number of folks in the interagency. About the same time, I started thinking about what a bigger strategy, a national level strategy, might look like to counter and stop ransomware. And so when I think about what the new administration might want to do, I think it has 3 parts, or as my partner, my former counterpart from the UK, Kieran Martin, called it, the triplet, the ransomware triplet. And that's, first is we have to improve defenses, but defenses alone are not going to stop this, because the bad guys will flow like water to wherever the vulnerabilities are. The second is we have to look at the business model of ransomware. And as Kimba talked about, we have to both look at kind of the financial transactions, those systems, but we also have to have some hard policy conversations about ransomware as an enterprise. Are there things we need to do in the criminal system, both in terms of looking at payments, whether payments can be legal? I'm not suggesting that we re-victimize the victim, but we need to look at it, take a little bit closer look at that. And then third, we have to go more aggressively after the actors and the sovereign states that are hosting them and allowing them, in some cases, with not just tacit approval, but direct approval to operate. But I do think, going back to defenses, the one thing that the federal government can do is provide more support to state and locals. That's what was behind my picking up the ball that you were carrying on cybersecurity advisors within CISA, and providing more direct on the ground support across the country. And I was glad to see in the 21 National Defense Authorization Act, the cyber state coordinator provision, and that was going to provide for around 50 additional cybersecurity advisors, one in every state, to work directly with state and local agencies, CIOs and CISOs. But as we talk about infrastructure investments, I really think that it is well past time for a 21st century digital infrastructure investment Act, where we provide the equivalent of a block grant to state and locals where they can modernize their IT infrastructure that'll improve citizen services, that'll boost American tech companies, that'll provide more high-paying tech jobs to more Americans. And yes, it will help stop ransomware. It will improve defenses by going to cloud-based services with multi-factor authentication. Just that one thing alone of multi-factor will really, I think, put a dent, at least in the current iteration of ransomware.
Yeah, great. And there is a growing discussion and debate around the public policy with regard to payment of ransomware demands, and I do think that's something that we're going to have to sort of really wrestle with. Very complicated issue. But as you, Tim, please.
Suzanne, yeah, if I could just come in and pick up on a point that Chris just made, which is, I think right on target. And thankfully, cyber policy has been an area where there's been actually a fair amount of continuity across administrations and across parties, including on the Hill. So what you just alluded to in terms of the state and local dimension of this and the steps that we can take to protect against ransomware, the good news is a lot of the steps that need to be taken to protect against ransomware will also help us protect organizations against a whole series of other potential threat vectors. So the ransomware currently poses this risk and has, I think, woken up a lot of people across the country to this threat of malicious cyber activity. When, Buffalo, the school system went offline last month for a couple of days, but also the activity that dates back years now that Chris was just alluding to. So there's an awareness across the country now that this is a risk, and hopefully steps can be taken that will not just protect against ransomware, but also then increases the basic cybersecurity level for a whole range of other potential attack vectors. And our current concern is, which, this was under the previous administration, CISA issued a joint alert together with the FBI and HSS, warning specifically of the impact ransomware could have on hospitals and healthcare facilities, which, if we think about the rollout of vaccines right now, the production, the transportation, the deployment, is obviously something where we are concerned. It's not just about people making money, but where a temporary disruption of certain services could also have an impact on that front, which is why we are particularly concerned about it right now, why we made it a secretary priority and the first sprint, because we want to make sure that we manage this risk and then use it also to have a broader systemic impact down the road beyond the initial sprint.
Excellent.
And Suzanne, just one other thing I want to build on something that Chris was pointing out, which is that, this is actually something that I very much have come to over that same time period of starting to really look at this disconnect between where a lot of the government's focus was, which is, and appropriately, right, on these nation state actors that do in fact pose us a threat, right? But if you actually talk about, and Chris is absolutely right, if you actually talk about what affects most Americans, they are never going to run into the Russian SVR. They're going to run into, ransomware, business email compromise, other kinds of scams, right? That's what we are dealing with. And I think the larger point, to my mind, right, is that then what this argues for is not that you then take Cyber Command and say, all right, your job is now to fight cyber criminals. Like, we need Cyber Command to stay focused on the nation state threats. What we have to do is continue to build up our capabilities in organizations like CISA. We have to continue building our capabilities in our law enforcement. And we have to change the way that we think about law enforcement in the 21st century. That, the metric for the FBI and the Secret Service has always been guys in cuffs, right? And it may be the case that we just can't physically get to some of these actors. And so we need to broaden the aperture of what is success in law enforcement. In terms of literally even the performance metrics by which we measure the, is an FBI agent or a Secret Service agent being successful at their job. It's not just about the arrests and the prosecutions, but it's about the broader disruption. And so it's not like we can forget about the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans, but we have to be able to also do the criminals as well. So we're going to have to walk and chew gum. And the US government is capable of doing that, but it means we have to have that level of prioritization across the government.
Well, it also means we have to have a level of coordination across the government, right? And a level of, something that makes sure that while the FBI is making this shift and taking this key role in ransomware, it is doing so in lockstep with CISA in terms of being able to then derive the information that's necessary to get out to everybody else, so that all defenders can raise their game, et cetera. And State Department with respect to the international cooperation, and the private sector with respect to the important work that companies like Microsoft are doing. So Michael, let's talk a little bit about that White House coordination. As Tim noted, I'm a member of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. We recommended a national cybersecurity director, and Congress thought that was a good idea, and then made it a legal requirement, put it in law in the Defense Authorization Act. The administration has established a deputy national security advisor for cybersecurity, and is still working through exactly how they're going to set up that national cyber director office, and who will lead it, and how it will relate to the deputy director for cybersecurity at the NSC. But you've given this a lot of thought, and you were the cybersecurity coordinator, obviously. So I'd be very interested in your thoughts, both on kind of what you think it maybe should look like at the White House level, but importantly, how both these roles really, but how the White House can best support CISA and DHS in its important mission, and particularly in its mission where it is being asked to work the interagency, if you will, to lead, to guide, to coordinate certain issues at the CISA level.
Sure. So I think that the White House has an extremely important role in coordinating cybersecurity related issues. And one of the key reasons is because cybersecurity is strangely what I call one of those yes issues, meaning, in other words, is it a national security issue? Yes. Is it an economic issue? Yes. Is it a law enforcement issue? Yes. Is it, and you just go down the list and it's yes to all of those things, right? Which means that that is an issue that will never just be in one agency's job jar, right? You listen to how all of us have been talking this morning, but Tim and his list of all the interlocutors that he works with, right? And the agency names that we've been throwing out, and we haven't even gotten to some of them that have, big cybersecurity roles. And so for the US government, you need people in the White House that are focused on coordinating across all of those different bureaucratic structures. And it's not because those people don't know what they're doing, that they aren't really highly competent and very mission focused. It's that their job is to focus on their mission. And you need somebody whose job it is to focus on the broader set and bring those missions together, to be an enabler for them. Now, I also think that, there are certainly, I was able to do that job with a lot of support directly from the president and the national security advisor. But there are some things that structurally the National Security Council is not really well set up to do. And two of them in particular are interacting with the private sector and interacting with Congress, which is actually something that you very much need to be doing in cybersecurity policy. And so that's why I think that actually having a national cyber director that is an office within the broader executive office of the president, so those set of agencies that directly support the White House, is critically important. Because it can take on those functions, and very much Congress clearly assigned that. So that's why it is a presidentially appointed, Senate confirmed position. That's why it clearly has the authority to interact with the private sector, right, to enable that. And so I think with the, when you look at that, there is a lot of work that can be done there. Now, I also think that there are some dangers there, right? And one of them is making sure that you get that relationship with the Deputy National Security Advisor right. Because, let's face it, there's plenty of work to do. So, it's not like it has to inevitably be a pure bureaucratic turf war, because there's plenty of work to go around. but you need to get it structured right so they're not constantly clashing. The other thing is that you need to structure that position so that it doesn't try to just be a super CISA director. We've got a CISA, well, I mean, the administration hasn't currently named one, but we have that position, right? As I actually argued for when we were in the run-up for this, I actually used Chris as the example. I was like, Chris already has a boss. He doesn't need another direct boss telling him what to do and try to do his job. He needs someone at the White House that enables him to go do his job, or enables whoever the next CISA director is to go do their job. And so the NCD, in my view, should be looking at those and focusing on those issues that, for example, don't fall squarely just in CISA's job, right? Where they need that support of like, okay, now really all you sector-specific agencies across the board, you need to be paying attention to what CISA is doing here and working with them so that we go with a unified voice to the energy sector, the health sector, the transportation sector, whatever it is, so the US government actually looks like it knows what it's doing when it goes out there. Those are the kinds of things that the NCD should be doing. My own view is that with the, that means that you focus the NCD on being the strategic enabler for the government. That it becomes that focus of where do we need to be 3 to 5 years down the road? How do I build the capability in CISA? How do I build the capability in Treasury? How do I build the capability in EPA, sector-specific agency for the water sector? How do I build that capability so that the government is ready to do the missions that we want it to do? That's where I think the real, value of the NCD could be.
Yeah, great. You certainly have a unique perspective on that. So that's really helpful. Chris, I know you and I, spoke often. You were a frequent participant in those cybersecurity solarium meetings and Solarium Commission meetings. And I know that you share, as do I, Michael's concerns about how this National Cybersecurity Director will relate with CISA and how important it is to get that right so that this position empowers CISA and doesn't undermine the leadership role that Congress and the White House have given to CISA. But you've also, recently suggested that you think it's at least equally, if not more important, to name to nominate a director for CISA, to have somebody in there who is Senate confirmed, even though you and I think very highly of Brandon Wales and he's been doing a terrific job. Why is it so important to have a Senate confirmed head of CISA? And then what are your thoughts on this NCD position?
So Brandon, by the way, has been doing a fantastic job. And it's just one of those, constant, whether it's a validation or whatever, but the plan that we put together for succession in the event of an untimely departure, my untimely departure, that we had some sense of continuity and transition. And Brandon's just been doing a fantastic job, and I couldn't be prouder of the work the team's been doing. But when you look at the mission, when you look at the scope and the scale of the mission of CISA, the budget, the personnel, the leadership challenges, I think, just given the fact that it's an established agency that has such an important mission, you need to have a leader in place there as the administration continues to work through its 60-day review and beyond of the National Cyber Director position. And to Michael's point, his last one was the most critical in my view about the need for someone to be setting a vision for what the federal civilian executive branch, the .gov, what does it look like in 3 to 4 to 5 years? But it's not just the implementation of it. It's how do we set budgets across the various agencies so they're putting their part into the pot. And to date, we haven't seen a lot of, or at least total compliance in terms of paying up for some of the security services that CISA has been offering through, for instance, the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. And then the second thing is someone's got to do it, whether it's Ann Neuberger, who's just done a fantastic job as the Deputy National Security Advisor for Cyber, but someone, to Michael's point, has to be running some sort of God's eye view over cybersecurity operations within the federal government, whether it's intelligence community, the military operations, law enforcement, defensive and civilian side, someone has to have a as a daily job, that sort of coordination. I think that's probably better suited for the National Security Council, but nonetheless, that's got to be a clear mission set for someone right now.
Yeah. Well, and part of Kemba, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry. From the private sector perspective, now that I'm here and out of DHS, one of the things that I've observed is that the private sector has a hard time finding the right belly button. And as you know, the private sector owns or controls most of the critical infrastructure, and from the recent breaches has a lot of signals, for example, a lot of information, but it's difficult to find the right belly button. The private sector wants to just tell the government once and not have to navigate through the interagency to figure out whose remit is what and who is responsible for what. So having these structures in place, I think, will help with better actionable information sharing operations across the private sector and the government in ways that hasn't really occurred so smoothly in the past.
Yeah, to put it mildly, you're being gentle. Yeah. So Tim, we've got some questions, a number of questions from our audience related to the kind of the growth trajectory for CISA, and relatedly the comments by Secretary Mayorkas that CISA needs additional resources just to do the mission that it currently has. And the question is, can it really wait until the FY 2022 funds are available, or do we have an urgent need for funding, given the where you started this conversation, the vast set of issues, urgent issues that are on your plate?
Thanks, Suzanne. Yeah, so we are currently working on the budget proposal, and first of all, we were delighted to see that Congress provided CISA with additional funding through the American Rescue Act because of the recent campaigns that we witnessed and experienced, and the $650 million that were provided to provide CISA with more resources to execute its mission and to better defend and protect the civilian federal agencies. Something that we very much welcomed and consider a down payment for the work that needs to be done in the coming weeks, months, but frankly also most likely years, looking at the state that some of the systems are in and the work that's required to modernize them. So with respect to CISA's evolution and trajectory, thanks to the work of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and members of Congress who integrated several of the proposals that the Commission shared with Congress last year, the last year National Defense Authorization Act actually included a broad series of new authorities to CISA that we are now very focused on implementing, ranging from new threat hunting authorities so that CISA can actually, upon the request, and provide assistance to other federal agencies to see if hackers are in the networks, to shorten the amount of time it would take for us to detect them and then take action and response. It includes also a joint cyber planning office that will increase our capability to do scenario planning and to be prepared for future type of incidents. So that's another key development here. And we want to make sure that as we think strategically for the next year, but also beyond, that CISA's authorities and also frankly expectations, now by the public and all the work that has been done over the past year that Chris has been leading with respect to protecting the election, that those expectations and authorities align with the resources and the capacity of the organization. So that's, again, a big management challenge that we just are very focused on, that the Secretary is very focused on, and we're very keen to work with Congress and also our other partners to help CISA further mature and make that next leap, and make sure that we can act as that trusted interlocutor with the private sector when it comes to network defense, and CISA's role as kind of the quarterback for government, working with our other partners across the agency. And we are committed to set up the National Cyber Directive for Success. So conversations like these are helpful to get input for how best to operationalize that. So that's how we're currently thinking about the trajectory.
Terrific. Well, we've only got a few minutes left, but I want to put a provocative issue out there, as if talking about prohibiting payments for ransomware wasn't provocative enough. but we sort of skated over that. Talking about CISA's role in all of the activities that it does and all of the work that it's doing in response to the two massive hacks that have gotten so much attention this year, SolarWinds and the attack on them through Microsoft Exchange, has raised again the issue of, are our domestic agencies capable and equipped to defend our networks inside the United States, particularly when our adversaries are using U.S. infrastructure to carry out much of its malicious cyber activity, which makes it unlawful for NSA. NSA currently does not have the authority to sit on domestic networks or prowl through domestic networks to try to find this activity. And so the issue has been raised again, as it is periodically and has been for at least a decade, if not more, certainly since I think the Cyber Mission was given to DHS, about whether NSA and Cybercom and those entities that are typically foreign focused should be given broader authority within the United States to look for this kind of activity happening on US infrastructure. And so I'm curious what all of you think about this suggestion. And Chris, you're smiling. We'll start with you.
I am rarely of the opinion that more government surveillance is a good thing. I am similarly of the opinion that additional government bureaucracy is rarely a good thing. I think this is to Kemba's point about we need to have more meaningful operational relationships and information sharing between government and industry. I think there's a whole lot that can be done in terms of working with industry to get them to share a little bit better information about what's happening across their platforms. If their platforms are being abused, then we can ask a few additional requirements. I think the last administration in an 11th hour executive order issued a know your customer requirement for infrastructure as a service. I think that's a great, at least, approach that we can dissect through a notice and comment period that the Department of Commerce, that I believe is among other things, looking at. I think that's where we start, but I'm supremely uncomfortable with any sort of additional domestic intelligence capabilities being sought or given.
Michael, I see you've taken your mute button off. I assume you want to weigh in.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I just think that it's the wrong way to go for several reasons. One, I agree with Chris. Like we've dealt with this in a number of different situations, right? Even after 9/11 and the counterterrorism mission. And I think that really the answer is not to suddenly task NSA and Cyber Command with something new. We need them actually doing their mission overseas and stay focused on that. We have domestic agencies who have the ability to get this authority already through the Department of Justice and the FBI. We can use that. Now, maybe we actually also need the FBI and NSA to share more internally, and do a better job, crossing, those bureaucratic silos, just like we had to do with counterterrorism information in the early 2000s, right? So now we need to do more of that with cybersecurity information. The other thing is that I think that, there's still this idea that cyberspace is this sort of thing out there that's sort of in the ether. But when you actually start really focusing on what it would mean, you were actually alluding to this, Suzanne, so that's not just having NSA kind of, float gently over Kansas. That means actually having the government go probe and poke at somebody's network that they own, right? That is owned by an American, in a business or, something like that, an organization. And suddenly that takes on a very different cast when you actually put it in those concrete terms. And so it's an easy talking point, but the reality of it is, way more complicated. And so I think that rather than, focusing there, the effort should be on as Chris said, figuring out what gaps we have in those informations, and then what in that information, and then who already has that, because the chances are also between companies like Microsoft and Google and Facebook and Palo Alto and Symantec and all those cybersecurity providers out there, I bet we already have a lot of it. And so the issue is, how do we actually cross-correlate that and bring that together in a in a useful fashion?
Great. Well, and as you point out, Michael, that while the nation state adversaries, if they were in fact the ones ultimately to whom we can attribute these attacks, may have taken some of their last steps using U.S. infrastructure, you have to believe that there was a fair amount of planning for this that was done back at their home offices in their nation states, which is where we expect our foreign intelligence folks to be gathering information for us about plans and intentions. So as was said earlier, with respect to coordinating the interagency inside the United States among federal players, there's plenty of work to be done. There's plenty of work to be done with respect to understanding and detecting our nation state activity overseas as well as domestically for folks in their mission spaces. I think that's exactly right. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and I want to be respectful of people's schedules, but this was a great conversation, and we barely scratched the surface. And I'm already decided I want to try to get the gang back together again before too long, because there are always important issues for us to discuss. But I think we helped illuminate the role of CISA through a deep dive on an important issue around ransomware. And the relevance of the organizational structure that goes with that, and the role of the private sector as well. So I want to thank each of you for, I know you're all very busy people, taking the time to join us today for this conversation. I thought it was terrific. And thanks to all of you who tuned in.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.